very relevant and burning aspects on investigations, asthma, COPD, and ARDS. It's a matter of great privilege for us to have among us very eminent speakers and experts in this pulmonology area. We have today moderator Dr. Aditya Jindal, who is a leading pulmonologist and joining us from Chandigarh. He is expert in advanced bronchoscopic procedures. And apart from that, we also have other experts and panelists. Dr. Sheetu Singh, who is joining us from Jaipur. She is assistant professor in SMS Medical College. We have Dr. Arpan Shah among us, who is joining us from Vadodara. He is medical director at Pranayam Lung and Heart Institute in Vadodara. We have Dr. Sameer Arbat, who is joining us from Nagpur. He is the pioneer of interventional pulmonology in central India. And also, shortly, we will be joined by Dr. Utsav Samaria from Varanasi. So before we start our scientific session, I would request Head of Lupin Respira Division, Dr. and Mr. Raja Ganguly, to please take us through a brief corporate presentation. Over to you, Mr. Raja Ganguly.
Thank you, Vinay. Thank you for setting the tone for the meeting. Very good evening, doctors. I, on behalf of Lupin, welcome you all in this wonderful evening and on the webinar on a new normal in the respiratory domain. I also welcome our panelists, Dr. Sameer Arbat, Dr. Arpan Shah, Dr. Sheetu Singh, Dr. Utsav Samaria, and our moderator, Dr. Aditya Jindal. Naming this name, the only word which comes to my mind is that legacy. The legacy is still on. I would say Lupin, had been associated with the doctor's fraternity since 1968. And the face of Lupin is not just a brand or branding or beyond brand marketing. We do a lot of things for which Lupin is known for. So doctors, with you in every step, it is Lupin. Next. I'm sure in this COVID era when everybody is in a deep trouble, you and the doctors' fraternity is really fighting against this COVID-19, and Lupin salutes you in this aspect. Lupin salutes every healthcare workers who had been fighting day in, day out for this against the COVID-19. Next. Lupin really salutes to the real saviors of the society, and I believe that you all are safe and in a good state of health and mind, along with your loved one. And at any point of time, Lupin will be always there with you. Next. These are the few initiatives. As I know that there's something called which is Spirit of Lupin. So when it comes to the Spirit of Lupin, Lupin has taken some initiatives that truly reflects the spirit of Lupin, which I would say like support to the coronavirus by providing PPE kit, masks, gloves, and sanitizers, as well as for the infrared thermometers to the doctors' fraternity. Lupin gives back, supporting all sections of society in India, not only in India, but across the globe. Lupin has also initiated telemedicine as per the guideline of the Government of India, and different digital initiatives have been taken where we have initiated a lot of webinars, ECMEs, and have done many programs on the COVID updates. As well as we have also initiated some programs for the doctors, that in this era of technology, we should take the leverage of technology. We have also initiated a wonderful platform called Jan COVID, which is a dedicated platform for citizens of Mumbai, Indore, Bhopal, and currently we have also started in Bhopal and in Pune, and shortly will be starting in the other cities of India also. Other than that, one of the most important thing which we all had been talking about the ensuring the production and supply chain in India as well as US and across the globe. So Lupin had ensured the supply chains and the essential medicines across the globe. Next. The support to SCPs is through clinic sanitization. We have done thousands of clinic sanitization across India. We have given the PPE kits to the doctors' fraternity wherever required. We have provided N95 masks to all the healthcare workers. We have given sanitizers to the healthcare professionals as well as the infrared thermometers. Next. Regarding the webinars, which is for disseminating knowledge across the doctors' fraternity, recently many of you have been a part of that. We have organized a TV summit, which was a back-to-back 4 days program, and with the eminent speakers, insightful topics, an excellent participation of delegates. I'm very pleased to know there were unique login of more than 2,000 doctors in this, and average attendance of each days were more than 1,500. The observation, along with that, we have during this COVID-19 period, there was a lot of challenge in observing some of the important days in the world of pulmonology. Like we know that the World Asthma Day was in the month of May, but because of the COVID-19 situation, our whole field force was not able to reach. But then again, we have observed the World Asthma Day as best as possible with in the virtual platform, with by giving the posters, personalized e-cards, and for last 17 years, Lupin had taken initiative to plant for a plant saplings. This year also, with the help of Helpage India, the legacy was maintained, and we have gone for the virtual tree plantation, which was widely appreciated across India by the SCPs and the doctors' fraternity. We have also connected with the majority of KOLs across India on COVID-19 updates and other important medical topics. Next. We have also organized the digital media for doctors for 4 lectures back-to-back were organized for the doctors to disseminate digital knowledge to our medical practitioners and upskill digital capabilities on different relevant topics like social media for the doctors, YouTube for the doctors, and trend for the 2020, harnessing the power of the Google search, and many others. And it was not done none other by Mr. Rohit Uttam Chandani, a renowned digital consultant and speaker and trainer. Next. A telemedicine platform to connect with these patients is very, very important. We all know, because in this COVID-19, many of your patients are not being able to reach to you because of the lack of transportation, communication, and other challenges. So where there, Lupin has initiated the telemedicine platform, where we are getting a very encouraging response from the doctors' fraternity, particularly from the chest specialists. More than 5,000 people, doctors are now onboarded in this telemedicine platform and still going on. And we are compliant with the guidelines of the Government of India. As I said, Lupin gives back. The Lupin Foundation has that there's a history of Lupin's corporate social responsibility. I'm very glad to share this some small data with you, which I'm sure that as far as when it comes to the contribute to the society, it matters a lot. That we have provided 8.52 lakhs of masks to the healthcare workers. We have given 62,000 meals to the different migrant workers and transports. We have given 1.95 lakhs of food kits to the villagers and the needy peoples, including the migrant laborers in the different places. Our people have engaged in this activity. They are really, they salute to each one of them. We have provided more than 2 lakhs sanitizers bottles. We have given 10 lakhs of PP kit to the doctors' fraternity who really need it. And we have also given 10 lakhs of medical equipments and safety gears to the different states, as well as 45 lakhs of meal kits were given to the different villages. Next. We're glad to announce these are some of the glimpses where we are really doing, Lupin employees are distributing food and water bottles in the Mumbai Kurla station for the laborers who are, this was a very sad pic, but then again, they were leaving Mumbai, but then we tried our best to help them with the food and the bottles. We also, stand in the highways in the UP and different places where the migrant laborers were traveling. We were giving them the food kits and the water bottles. We were also helping the Maharashtra in the different villages by providing different help to the extending our help to the healthcare workers. Not only that in India, but into the US also, we are providing the meals to the different hospitals, and our brave hearts in the US leaves no stone unturned to combat COVID, and also in other part of the globe. Another one of the most important initiative which we have taken is for our internal employee across India as well as in globe, particularly in India. All Lupin employees were there to avail this platform called Liberate. If any of the employees or their family members required any kind of medical help in this COVID situation, there was a platform, and the team has done extremely well, and we have catered this medical assistant to lots of internal employees. Thanks to the doctors who are in this platform, thanks to all the workers, all the volunteers who are there in this platform. Next. Other than the internal employee, we are very glad to say that we have opened a platform called Jan COVID-19, which is a helpline number, is an IVR platform in Mumbai, Indore, Bhopal, and currently now in Pune. So this is being, we have got a panel of general physicians, psychologists, respiratory physicians, and psychiatrists. So patients are getting a free consultation and we are getting a very good response across, and we have been appreciated by the state authorities and the local authorities for this gesture. Next. So COVID-19, a new normal, requesting you all to throw light on the current scenario and highlight what next for the benefit of the society. And I'm sure, next, Lupin, beyond brand marketing and the commerce aspect, we are always there with you to fight against any of such situations. And for currently, we are there with the doctor's fraternity. So it's a call from Lupin that let's fight this virus together. And thank you so much. With this, I'll again hand over the session to Dr. Vinay Pirohi.
Thank you, Mr. Raja Ganguly, for sharing very exciting and indeed very good initiatives by Lupin for the public as well as healthcare professionals. Now, moving on to the scientific agenda, now I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Aditya Jindal, who is joining us from Chandigarh. And I would also request our audience to please post your questions from time to time. All of our experts will be more than happy to answer all those queries. So over to you, Dr. Aditya Jindal.
Thank you very much. On my behalf and on the behalf of this panel, I would like to extend thanks to Lupin for organizing this webinar and to the audience who is listening to us. As we all know, COVID-19 has impacted medical practices all across the globe. And one sort of discipline which is actively involved and the most impacted is the respiratory medicine or pulmonary medicine, because not only are we actually our day-to-day practice has changed, but we are also managing the disease at the front lines. We are the sort of the frontline corona warriors as named, and in the ICUs everywhere, the chest physicians are the most involved in corona practice. And this disease has impacted, I would say, people who are just doing minor OPD practice, to people who are having their own clinics, to people working in government hospitals or in big corporate sector hospitals, from the most basic to the most advanced. And of all of us, there is no guideline, there is no precedent on how to go about treating these patients and how to actually take care so that we treat these patients also and we do not get sick ourselves and our family members and everyone else is also protected. So the next few minutes will be spent in discussing all this so that all of us can come together to a conclusion as how to best handle this problem. And we have a very eminent panel of doctors from all across India, and we'll be discussing these topics. So first, we'll be discussing how to do investigations, whether they are indicated or not. We'll be just discussing about asthma, COPD, and the respiratory failure or ARDS in COVID, how it is different from the normal ARDS, the garden variety ARDS, which we usually see, and how to go about treating it. And I would request everybody to keep on posting their questions, and we can take them up at the end of this session. So for the first discussion, I would like to invite Dr. Sheetal Singh and Dr. Sameer, and they will be discussing about the investigations, how has the COVID impacted the change in the spirometries, the DLCO, and bronchoscopic interventions, etc., etc. So I think I'll start with Dr. Sheetal, and I'll just request her to tell us how the COVID has impacted the investigations in current practice, and what are the indications actually which you think are required for the spirometry or DLCOs or other investigations?
Hello everyone. So the COVID has affected one and all. It is a new virus, and unfortunately we don't have any immunity, any drugs or any vaccine. And so also we don't have any guidelines. So every day we are learning something new, how to go about. And during the lockdown, we got some time to prepare ourselves about how we are going to unlock and how are we going to start off with the investigations. Spirometry, as we all know, is an aerosol generating procedure, and thus it is quite risky not only for the patient but also for the technicians and anyone who is in the vicinity. Currently, only essential spirometries are advised. Non-essential spirometries, for example, as in monitoring, may not be done. Pre-operative spirometries may be needed for evaluation and pre-op check. Another part is that the technician should be well versed with it. The most experienced amongst all of them should start doing it, and we should, I think, provide the technician with a PPE kit and an N95 mask. Moreover, the area where the spirometry is done should have a negative ventilation, and if that facility is not there, the WHO guideline can be used for at least 12 exchanges of air in that particular room. Disinfection of the equipment, which includes the tubing and the valve, is also very important. And we can also use, alternative methods of diagnosis in which, you don't need a spirometry. Say, for example, a peak flow can be done for asthma, or impulse oscillometry, though we don't have it here in our setup, but that may be used because it is, more patient friendly. Patient does not have to do a lot of effort, and simple, has to inspire and expire into the tube. So that may be used at centers where it is available.
Okay, Dr. Sameer, how would you say that what has the COVID changed in your practice, especially in regard to investigations? Any comments from your side?
Yeah, I believe there have been two major changes when it comes to a pulmonologist's practice with regards to COVID-19. First is I think all of us have witnessed a very steep downfall in the number of patients who are coming to us. So I think that is going to change in the coming few days. But then what we are now left with is dealing with the same number of patients, but in a very different way. Very great emphasis will be given on disinfection, which I think should have been the cornerstone always. But with COVID-19, now we are getting all the more sensitive, all the more judicious as to how we utilize our resources. So first thing I believe is, as the guidelines have said, spirometry is now only and only recommended in specific cases, patients who are pre-operative, patients who are posted for lung transplant, any patients undergoing chemotherapy. So these are very limited indications that we are left with spirometry. Second thing is the requirements that come along while performing a spirometry, the requirement for a negative pressure room, a specific disinfection protocol. These might not be possible for each and every center. So one of the recommendations that have come from the Cleveland Clinic paper is that we might have to consolidate testing. So there will be limited centers which would be performing spirometry, centers which can provide proper PPE to the technician, which have a designated spirometry room where the ventilation or the exhaust is not going out to other part of the hospital area. We are still advised to manage patients virtually. So even now, as much as possible, we should manage our patients virtually. If we can go ahead with treatment protocols with online consultation, rather than patients coming up to our OPDs, maybe crowding in our OPD, and our OPD now becoming a source of cross-infection. So these are the various difficulties I believe all of us are facing when it comes to spirometry in specific.
Okay, yes, Dr. Chetu.
Another thing is that the normal, the use of nebulized salbutamol that we were giving, if you really need to do it, then it should be done with an MDI, with a spacer, with a valve. So I think nebulization is slowly phasing out even during the investigation.
Okay, and how
explain, ma'am?
How about other tests like this thing you were talking about, peak flow meter? Do you think that is safe to do in OPD, or would you like to prescribe that for asthmatic patients for their homes and check them by telemedicine?
Should I take it?
Yes, Dr. Chetu.
Okay, so peak flow, even in the healthcare setting, would be a little bit difficult again because the patient has to do a forceful exhalation, which means it's an aerosol generating procedure. So, currently, I think it would be advisable for home monitoring. If, however, you have to do a diagnosis, peak flow may be done, but again, you have to have all the precautions. But again, you can always do a spirometry. So it's more useful as a home monitoring tool, especially when you have that written asthma action plan. And especially you are doing a virtual consultation, you can simply ask the patient to do a peak flow, make a chart, and send it over to you, and you can step up the therapy or step down the therapy. So I think it's more for that virtual thing.
Okay, that's a very valid point. So one can ask patients who are asthmatics to actually do their peak flow meter at home and then follow up either on telephonically or maybe even if they come to the OPD, bring a record. So Dr. Sameer, any comments on other types of pulmonary function tests like DLCO and FeNO, for example? How do you feel about that?
See, I believe there is one blanket rule for all pulmonary function tests, which is you should defer all routine tests. Because eventually most of these procedures are aerosol inducing, and you go this way or that way, what you're doing is you're exposing the patient and to the patient who's coming in next and your healthcare worker, your staff and the machinery to a chance of contracting COVID-19. So for all the tests, there have been minor changes with how you can perform a DLCO and all. But I believe for most of the centers, we should defer routine testing for the next few months.
Okay, so that's another valid point. So do only indicated procedures, defer all elective testing, especially in the case of pulmonary function test. So I'd like each of both of you to just tell me what do you think are the actual recommended indications for spirometry in this time. So I think Dr. Shitu, you can go first. Just tell me 2 or 3 indications which you think should be still be done, for which spirometry still should be done.
I think one is pre-operative evaluation, and second would be, you are really stuck with a diagnosis. You don't know whether this is a dyspnea, which is psychogenic, or it is asthma, or is it COPD. And that too, very much indicated. Otherwise, I think currently only emergent, like any very essential.
Okay, Dr. Sameer.
I think patients who are supposed to go for a lung transplant, or patients who are undergoing surveillance for side effects of chemotherapy. Other than that, I think there's no routine indication which should now warrant a spirometry in this scenario.
Okay, so I think we can wrap up this.
Dr. Aditya, sorry,
yes.
can I just have a, can I?
Yes, sure, please.
Yeah, Dr. Chitu, I just have a different perspective to home monitoring of PFR as of now in this scenario. See, in Gujarat, we have seen lots and lots of cases coming up, and there is a significant number of subclinical cases that are there. Even at home, what happens is there is a risk of aerosol generating while doing a PFR, especially in a certain sections of people. So my take would be that as of now, we should defer doing even a PFR monitor unless absolutely indicated or the patient has been ruled out completely of this possibility. That's just a different take on it.
Okay, so I think all the panelists also have different views on this thing. So I think the takeaway message from this would be that avoid all routine indications of spirometry till further guidelines are available or other methods are available to do this. Do only the necessary indications, and I think that's that. So next, let's move to the next part of this session. So that would be, would invite Dr. Arpan and Dr. Utsav Samaria to actually take these questions. So major part of pulmonary practice has now become based on interventions, and you know that bronchoscopy and other interventional procedures are very important in any pulmonologist sort of armamentarium and day-to-day practice. And of course, this has also changed. There is a high chance of transmission of COVID to the staff, to the doctor, to the patients. So I think I'll start with Dr. Arpan only. So, Dr. Arpan, what do you think are the indications of diagnostic bronchoscopy in this era?
Thank you, Dr. Aditya. As Dr. Shitu and Dr. Samir both pointed out, that this is quite new for all of us, and guidelines have been changing every now and then. We don't have any definite plans. So to make things simpler, as far as the bronchoscopic procedures are concerned in day-to-day practice, I think we can all use our clinical judgment to divide the indications into emergency procedures, semi-emergency procedures, and all elective procedures. By rule of thumb, I think all elective procedures, for as far as the bronchoscopies are concerned, we can postpone it for another 2 months till things settle down. Only indication I would suggest, I would think of while doing a procedure in this scenario and this setup would be massive hemoptysis or foreign bodies or mucus pluggings in ICU patients on ventilators. And other things that we can do it in semi-emergencies like diagnostic of malignancies, if at all indicated, and if it cannot be postponed.
Okay. So, Dr. Utsav, suppose I'll ask you a clinical question. Suppose a patient with mediastinal lymphadenopathy comes to you, and patient has been having fever for 15, 20 days or 30 days, and you're relatively sure that patient is COVID negative. So, would you go for an EBUS in this case?
Thank you, Dr. Aditya. It's so nice to talk to you also, and I welcome all of you. And this question is very relevant. Because yes, EBUS is an important part of intervention in pulmonology now. But again, will this mediastinal lymphadenopathy affect the patient immediately? Is he at risk so much that this requires? So this comes under a semi-urgent bronchoscopic procedure, which should be done ideally after a COVID test has been done. And if the test is negative, you can proceed with that. It is not at all an emergency procedure, and that requires that it will make the change of life and death in the patient. So yes, you, my doctor, are at the top of the food chain. You are at the top of the food chain. You are at the apex of pyramid. If you are healthy, you are safe, you will be able to save thousands others. That is very important, that you be safe.
So this leads us to another important point. So Dr. Arpan, as COVID testing is not very widely available nowadays, so do you recommend, like, if you really have to go for a procedure, get a COVID test before going for the procedure, or how will you go about it?
See, the guidelines in Gujarat have changed as of now. What they are saying is that you send a COVID test, do not wait for the reports. If you think that the life of patient is in danger, or if it requires an emergency surgical or a endoscopic procedure, you can go ahead with that.
Okay. And Dr. Utsav, how is it in your area?
See, sir, I always feel you have to, this is an individualized approach from patient to patient. If we have heard numerous cases across India of doctors dying after operating on a COVID patient. So that's what I want to emphasize, that, a simple case of bronchoscopy like, mediastinal lymphadenopathy or any other lung lavage or that sort of thing, it can be delayed for a COVID test. But a case where patient is going to be, it's a matter of life and death, like central airway obstruction, like a mass, a foreign body, or a mucus plug, in cases of massive hemoptysis or a migrated stent, maybe, in that cases, we have to immediately take care of the patient. Otherwise, we may lose the patient immediately. Or we can wait for 2-3 days in other cases.
I think the best way is to use your clinical knowledge and use maximum possible precautions. And what I feel personally is try to do it in a negative pressure room if possible, and minimize the staff as much as possible, and use maximum possible protection in terms of PPE kits and N95.
So that leads us to the next question. I think Dr. Utsav can answer this. So what are if there is indication to do a bronchoscopy or even a thoracoscopy, so what are the precautions that hospital or a doctor needs to take to actually...
The precautions are numerous, but the most important thing is that we should avoid conscious sedation. We are in a habit of doing bronchoscopy in conscious sedation, and that should be avoided because patient coughs often during conscious sedation. So we should try performing bronchoscopies under GA, general anesthesia. That way the coughing will decrease. Then again, I would seriously recommend that we should do it in a negative pressure room, so that the air is sucked out and we are at least safe from those. There are certain points regarding minimizing the staff, that is very essential, because we are in a country that is all the procedure costs are determined and then the procedure is done. So we have to, like, it is very essential to wear PPE, and we have to follow strict PPE protocols, right? So it is very essential to wear PPE during the procedure, and one should avoid going for rigid bronchoscopy during the COVID era, or if rigid bronchoscopy, because it's a time taking process and requires multiple staff to do the procedure. So rigid bronchoscopy, if at all is being done, should be done with a PAPR, that is powdered air purifying respirator with which has a separate oxygen supply in itself. So, and should be done by the most experienced person. We should not train students at all during the COVID era. These certain points are very important. Even though bronchoscopy diagnoses COVID at least 93% times, but COVID, the bronchoscopy is not included as a diagnostic modality because it has increased risk to the doctor. And however hard we teach, the donning and doffing mistakes are being made by staff day in and day out in every setup.
Dr. Arpan, do you have any other comments on any other barrier precautions or any other specific type of PPEs or anything you would like to make? I think you have muted yourself. Could you just unmute?
Yeah. Dr. Utsav has pointed out almost everything. And as far as I'll just have one comment out here. As far as the PPEs are concerned, it is the doffing of PPE that is more important always.
Definitely.
Because after doing a procedure, the most important focus is removing of PPE. That's where all the infections to healthcare workers have started happening. So my just one comment on that particular aspect of it. Rest, I think Utsav has covered up everything.
Okay. So I think I'll just summarize this by saying that, again, like pulmonary function testing, the use of bronchoscopy should be restricted to patients who really need it, and especially in the cases of emergencies. If you really want to go for a bronchoscopy, the decision to do a bronchoscopy, of course, has to be individualized according to the patient and the area you are practicing in. Maybe the indications are not similar in Mumbai as compared to maybe in Chandigarh, or in another place where the prevalence is low. And take all patients as positive, get testing beforehand the procedure, and use all precautions. If you have a negative pressure isolation room, that's the best thing. But I think even without that, there is a possibility to, I would suggest that anybody who wants to do bronchoscopy, take all the precautions. I think we are finished with the...
Sir, just one point I would like to add. Dr. Sheetu wants to say something.
Yeah, I think Dr. Utsav, you can continue, and then Dr. Sheetu can just put in a final comment.
So we haven't mentioned, I forgot to mention about bronchial thermoplasty. And about cryobiopsy. Cryobiopsy is an increasingly fashionable tool in our work now. Very important also in cases of DPLD, right? So these procedures can be delayed. They can be delayed to up to 2 to 3 months to 6 months, and we have to wait out for our patients. So once your area is considered to be safe from COVID, only then attempt cryobiopsy or these kind of procedures.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Sheetu?
Yes, so I just wanted to inform everyone that the Indian Association of Bronchology is coming up with, guidelines on how to go about with bronchoscopy in the COVID era. I have mentioned about the negative pressure room, but many times it is not possible. So endorse the WHO statement on the same, that if you don't have a negative pressure, at least try to have 12 air exchanges in 1 hour. So that, or 160 liters per second per patient. Either of these would be good depending on the logistics of that particular area.
Yeah, I think the Indian Chess Society is also coming up with similar guidelines. Another point is that if you really want to have air exchanges, you need to have a HEPA filter in place. So otherwise, I think this one common practice is to have large exhaust fans to maintain adequate ventilation, which has been actually standard practice in many areas, especially in government hospitals. Yes, Dr. Arpan, just wanted to say
as Dr. Utsav pointed out, I would like to comment here is that all rigid bronchoscopies are to be strictly avoided unless there is an indication of a migrated stent, or some kind of a stenosis. Otherwise, all rigid bronchoscopy, because they generate maximum amount of aerosols.
Okay. So, okay, I think we can now move to the next session that is on asthma. And this will be taken up by Dr. Shitu and Dr. Sameer. And so one is again we have somewhat discussed this. I think Dr. Shitu can again tell us something about diagnostic issues in asthma and how to go about diagnosing when we don't have any spirometry or anything.
So I think diagnosis of asthma, even before we stopped doing spirometries, was always a lot of clinical part was still there. So you still have to go by the clinical history of the patient. How is the dyspnea? Is it continuous? Is it intermittent? Are there any trigger factors, diurnal variation, seasonal variation, family history of atopy? All these still have to be taken, and now we would be depending on that even more. Till we start doing spirometries again. I would actually suggest you can start an empirical trial and give a peak flow meter to the patient, and the patient can chart the peak flow, and you can see that within 2 weeks of time the peak flow would improve if the patient is asthmatic on an ICS. Regarding what Dr. Arpan just said, I think we can give the patient enough instructions that the patient should do it in a separate room with the windows open. That needs to be made sure, and also that the patient is not having a concomitant COVID infection. So with that, peak flow would be helping even in the monitoring. Other than that, I think pheno and all are still out of mainly clinical and probably the response to the inhaled corticosteroids.
Okay, so Dr. Sameer, how about the treatment of asthma in this setting? So what do you think is the difference? Should we continue using inhalers, or difference between any metered dose or dry powder inhalers, use of nebulizers, etc.?
Yeah. So see, right now we have specific recommendations from GINA and a lot of papers which are stating as to how to go about managing a patient of asthma. So the first point here is that your treatment for asthma stays the same. A lot of patients might come up with a query that the corticosteroids might lead to higher chances of contracting the viral infection. So that is not the case over here. On the contrary, if they anyway stop their medication, there is a higher chance of them landing up in an exacerbation, coming to the hospital, and thus getting infected. I believe something that has been very basic to asthma management but has been very underutilized, which is the asthma action plan, is something which would be the cornerstone in treatment of asthma during such time. Because what you need now is your patient to understand his symptoms and his lung functions better than what he used to always come to you in your OPD, and you used to give a prognostic recommendation as to whether we should step up or step down. So first what we see is that the patient should have a good asthma action plan wherein he or she is charting her own symptoms, if possible can chart his or her own PFR readings, and then they know what to do when they land up in an exacerbation, what doses need to be increased, and what is the action that they need to go ahead with. With patients who've been on long-term oral corticosteroids, might be a requirement. As patients of chronic asthma, patients who've been uncontrolled might require long-term oral corticosteroids, and there's no other option right now that we can recommend to patients of this category. Always stay in touch with your asthmatic patients. I think telemedicine has come up as a very important tool when it comes to patients of chronic diseases like COPD and asthma. So stay in touch with your patient. There is a lot of anxiety. There is a lot of hysteria which is related to not just COVID, but the lockdown, prolonged staying inside home. So this is the time when your patient needs your advice. And this is when you can even help the patient in monitoring his or her symptoms on via telemedicine. Make sure that your patient does not stop any medication. That is another thing, that patients often stop their medication when there is no follow-up for a very long time. So that is a part that we need to cover. And eventually coming back to nebulizers, so there's a very, very strong recommendation to avoid nebulization practices completely. Your powdered meter dose inhaler is the drug of choice right now, along with a spacer. And make sure that your patient is not sharing the machine, the spacer, with his family members or anybody else. So I think these are the recommendation when it comes to management of asthma.
Okay, Dr. Shitu, I think I'll just ask you, okay, just shed more light on in-hospital nebulization and nebulization at home for patients, for example, bed-bound patients who have been prescribed home nebulization. So what are the recommendations and what do you think should be done?
Even the GINA guidelines have currently, advised against nebulization, and they have, advised MDI with a spacer with a valve. And sharing, as Dr. Sameer just told, is very important, because the tendency is, suppose in asthma, multiple people in the family have it, so they keep on sharing the same device. So I think educating the patient is important. Further, nebulization, some patients really can't do without it. So, for example, we are still continuing nebulization for some of the patients who are not responding to MDI with, a spacer in the hospital. But what we have done is we have kept them in the cottage ward, which is a separate room, and we just ask them to keep the windows open. So, and even at home, we are, telling them, please don't share the nebulizer if you are using one. And we try to, ask the patient not to use that, and it would be preferable to switch over to MDI or DPI. But if they are not, we tell them strict instructions on how to go about it. So I think there is no other option for us.
Okay, Dr. Sameer, any contraindication in the use of biologicals in asthma right now? For example, or mepolizumab?
Yeah. So GINA has recommended that we should go ahead with biologicals. There will be a definite advantage of patients continuing or patients being started on biological in comparison to you not starting them on biological. So it's a yes for biologics.
Okay, so I think yes, Dr. Shitu.
So here I would just like to share my experience. One of my patients was on mepolizumab, and she had already taken 2 courses, and it was her 3rd cycle during the lockdown. So somehow I could arrange it in Chandigarh, I think your city. So she managed to do it, and the GINA also recommends you may not start with it right now, but if the patient is already on it, then the fear of uncontrolled asthma would be there, and exacerbation would be there. So the need to continue the inhaled corticosteroids, the biologics, is important, and you need to educate the patient for the same.
I think I'll just sum up the discussion on asthma. So I think all agree that the diagnosis of asthma is basically a clinical one, and I think the use of spirometry at least is not mandated or not required at present, especially to diagnose asthma. The individualized recommendations might still be there, but I think overall it should be avoided. Focus should be on clinical, on sort of history taking and examination if that is needed. And treatment more or less is the same. It should be emphasized to the patient to continue with whatever medicines they are taking and not put a break in these medicines. Exacerbations probably would be treated in the same way. So I think that now we'll move on to the next major topic, that is COPD. And Dr. Arpan and Dr. Utsav will be taking up this discussion. So COPD, a lot of the mortality actually seen in COVID has been in COPD patients. So I think there have been some articles, especially from China, which say that the incidence of COVID has not increased in COPD patients, but the mortality rates are very high. Whether that is due to smoking or due to the COVID or due to the COPD or because of the advanced stage of these patients, we don't really know. And so, Dr. Arpan, how would you go about diagnosing a case of COPD? Because I think spirometric diagnosis is almost inbuilt into the definition. So, what would you say? How to go about it?
Dr. Aditya, that's a very clinical relevant question right now. But I think Dr. Shitu and Dr. Sameer has nicely covered up and you summed up the spirometry usage as far as diagnosis of asthma or COPD concerned. I'll just add on to those comments is that we can perform a simple chest X-ray before at all if we are planning to do a PFT. Otherwise, I think if it is not indicated, we can go by our clinical sense as far as diagnosis of COPD is concerned. And in a COPD case, we'll again have to see that whether it's a first-time exacerbation that's coming to us or a stable COPD, which is coming in a routine follow-up for the OPD patients.
Okay. And Dr. Utsav, how about treatment of COPD? Is there any difference in the management of COPD in these patients? And what about smoking cessation? Would you ask patients to come to you for a smoking cessation program?
Definitely, sir. Definitely, extremely useful question for the people, sir. We have to understand that there have been multiple studies, 2 to 3 studies at least, which have been talking about the role of smoking in COVID infection also. So Chinese group said about there is an increasing trend about increasing risk and trend in smokers of having COVID. So again, this was backed up with another European study which said similar that it is not only due to inflammation of the mucosa which smoking causes, but also because nicotine causes the upregulation of the ACE receptors in the lung. So both ways, this the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it goes and joins to the ACE receptors. So this
one of the reasons for one of the postulated reasons for increased mortality in Europe has been that that population has a genetically increased sort of expression of ACE receptors.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Also, we have to understand is why COPD patients have increased mortality in COVID. So COPD is a disease of old people, right? So हम अगर इंडिया का भी डाटा उठा के देखते हैं, we see the Indian data. So 50% of mortality of COVID is happening in people who are aged more than 60. And COPD is basically a disease of more than 60. Also because of the diseased breathing process, the patient is not walking. He's absolutely living a sedentary life. That sedentary life, bad lifestyle habits of a long years, and the diseased lung. So there is once a patient catches COVID infection or it catches any infection, there is a rapid deterioration in the lung function. And to this point, there is a gross mismanagement. There is the fear of COVID patient is so much so that the COPD patients are getting neglected. That is the basic problem. So there is a lot of time, spent in mistaking a COPD exacerbation as a COVID infection. So that problem needs to be addressed. About the treatment part, both GOLD and all the guidelines, the ATS European guidelines, they have said every patient has to maintain the same treatment. Yes, smoking cessation has to be advised. We should, we should have this role of telemedicine included. One more point is about the pulmonary rehabilitation. The pulmonary rehabilitation is a part inbuilt with COPD patients, right? So this pulmonary rehabilitation, how do we do without coming in contact with an outsider, is to do through telemedicine, to video calling. So that has to be included. The treatment remains the same. In the COPD era, COPD in COVID era, treatment does not change. That is the whole point.
Okay, so Dr. Arpan, So I think I'll just move from a bit of a medical question to a sort of more of a organizational question. So
Hello.
have you faced any? Yeah, can you hear me?
Sorry, there was some internet connection. Can you just repeat it?
Yeah, so I think I was saying that I moved from purely medical questions to more of a organizational or a demand and supply question. So have you faced any problems in prescribing oxygen concentrators or oxygen or non-invasive ventilation machines to your patient? Is there any difficulty? Is there any sort of a decreased supply or non-availability of these things?
No, this is completely an organizational point of view. In the initial phase of the lockdown 1 and lockdown 2, we had problems prescribing home oxygen or prescribing nebulizers, prescribing concentrators at home. But lockdown 3 onwards, we could manage to do it to most patients.
Okay.
Yes. And one more comment I would like to speak about here is about the mortality due to COVID. Now that has to be separated into two things: that mortality completely because of COVID and absence of all comorbidities, and mortality from COVID and along with the comorbidities. If you look at the Gujarat data and the deaths that are happening, almost 80 to 85% deaths that happen in a COVID infection have an associated comorbidities of either hypertension, diabetes, or an IHD. Only less than 15% of deaths are primarily due to COVID-19. So when we are looking at the mortality in COVID, I think this is one bifurcation we should always keep in mind.
So I think overall, if you're right that most of the deaths have occurred in patients who have underlying diabetes or hypertension rather than I think respiratory disorders. Yes, Dr. Sir.
So sorry to disturb you. I would like to add a fun fact, sir. Me being from the Death City, and every superstar and film star comes to Varanasi for cremation. So I have got some data from the cremation grounds of Varanasi, the Manikarnika, the famous Manikarnika Ghat and Harishchandra Ghat. So these people are actually very unhappy due to COVID because the death percentage, the number of deaths per day, the number of pyres that are the pyres which are burning per day has decreased to less than 25%. The COVID, in some sense, has decreased the mortality overall.
Yeah, I think most of us would have that experience that a lot of infections that have been transmitted, like people who used to come to the OPDs, because of the use of these masks and face shields and a lot of sanitization, I think a lot of hygiene has crept into routine day-to-day life, and that has actually led to a decrease in infections overall. And I think that's a very positive step for everybody.
I think
yes.
Road traffic accidents have decreased on a big scale. There's a huge decrease in patients who've come with road traffic accidents now. So the lockdown has affected in various ways.
So I don't know whether overall Indian mortality has gone down or it has increased because of COVID.
So, Dr. Arbut, I have a question to Dr. Arbut. So, Dr. Arbut, are you with the roads being empty in Nagpur? Are you taking your Jaguar out for a drive?
I think this is decided. So this is off limit. I think this will be taken up after the. Yes, Doctor.
Yeah. So coming to all these deaths and everything, I would like to just say we have been listening to this new term that the new normal in pulmonary medicine, new normal in life. My take is this is nothing new. This was supposed to be what we were supposed to. As pulmonology, we were always supposed to wear mask while taking care of TB patients. We are not doing it. So I think Corona and the lockdown and all its after effects has got us back to our senses. So I think the whole terminology, that new normal, should not be there. It's the normal.
Okay. Okay, thing. And now we have sort of talked about how Corona is affecting the pulmonologist. I think now we should be talking about how the pulmonologists are affecting the Corona. So we'll be talking about ARDS, how we manage, what are the differences in management of these patients as compared to routine ARDS. I think Dr. Sheetu will be able to tell us how is the COVID ARDS different from our garden variety ARDS.
Actually, I'd like to start with my personal experience. I have been posted in a COVID ward, right from 15th March, because SMS was the only hospital in Rajasthan and we were getting patients from all across. Somehow now the patients have been restricted to their home districts. So the wing that I was actually looking after, like our team was looking after, we have discharged almost 300 patients with COVID. So what I have seen is a spectrum of patients, right from asymptomatic, which is the majority, followed with mild symptoms. Some had a pneumonia, which was some symptomatic, needed some oxygen, and we have also seen those very florid cases with comorbidities on ventilator, not responding to anything. We have also given everything and anything. Like right now, we started off with lopinavir, ritonavir right in the beginning, HCQ and plasma also we have given to 3 or 4 of our patients. So what I have realized is that nothing really works. This ARDS actually, we have 2 subsets of patients, and that has also been described in the literature. The L phenotype and the H phenotype. The H phenotype has everything high, that is a high elastance, a high recruitability, high shunting is there, and then they respond well to intubation and a high peak. Then we have another group of patients who have L, which is the L phenotype, and these patients have a low elastance, low lung volume, low recruitability, and these generally would not, do very well on a ventilator, and oxygen would probably be more beneficial for this group. What more is there that there's some patients whom the compliance is quite well preserved whenever we put the patient on ventilator, and these patients may not really benefit with prone ventilation. Another group is those, even despite high PEEPs, they don't respond. In such cases, we try, to get them to a lower PEEP, because that causes again a low blood pressure and subsequent complications. So that was what we faced. What literature also has actually shown us that this ARDS is probably different because, it's a microangiopathy that's going on. There was this study that got published in the NEJM, and in which the autopsy, they studied the lung, and they compared 6 lungs.
I just interrupt you. So, because you're talking about this topic, there is a question from Dr. J.R. Balara from Nagaur, and he's asked about what are the pulmonary vascular changes and autopsies of patients who died of corona infection. So he said we hear a lot about pulmonary alveoli, but nothing about pathology of pulmonary vessels. So you're talking about this. I think you can expand a little more.
Okay, sure. So this particular study did, the whole research on the pathology part, where they took the autopsy from 7 patients who died of COVID pneumonia and 7 patients who died of an influenza pneumonia. And when they saw the epithelial denudation was there, the damage was there, but what was different was the microangiopathy, the microthrombi, and there were certain new vessels that were forming, which was called as the neoangiogenesis. So that is different in COVID pneumonia, and it was significantly higher in COVID pneumonia versus in influenza pneumonia. So that may be one reason for this disease being different from influenza.
Okay. I think we'll go to the next question. So, Dr. Sameer, any comment about general ICU precautions? What are the things that one needs to prepare before, for any doctor, any ICU, how to prepare ICU for a COVID patient?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important question, and I have a lot to talk about when it comes to this specific question. And I'll break it up into 3 parts. One is your clinical changes that you need to make, mechanical changes that you need to make to your setup, and third is the administrative changes. So first, I'll start with the guidelines that we have. So what any ICU needs is something which is a very strong point of your clinical setup, which is actually outside the ICU, which is your triage room. So basically, you need what we call in our hospital is a COVID corner. A lot of centers are calling it as your fever OPD. So what you need is a designated place where every patient who's coming to your hospital is first undergoing a set of questionnaire, which will then designate the patient into mild, moderate, or severe susceptible for COVID-19. So I think this is something which is outside the ICU, but very much important for your ICU. So you need to first triage your patients into these three subsets, and then eventually when you get your patient into the ICU, so first are all the changes which are related to disinfection, sanitization. As I had mentioned earlier, or as Dr. Arpan said, these were the things that we should have followed all our life. Every time, every respiratory physician should be allotted. I think this is a point which should be made to the hospital administrators, basically, that we should be allotted N95s irrespective of a COVID era or non-COVID era. So then these are the changes that we need to go through. First is that all your healthcare workers in the ICU need to have proper equipment, that is personal protective equipment. So the PPEs should be there, and everybody should be having an N95 mask. I think it is very easy to say it here while we are sitting in a panel discussion, but the ground reality is very much different. Although we do have an SOP when it comes to the N95 mask. So now what we are following is the SOP that has come from AIIMS Delhi, that you can reuse your mask in a cycle of 4 days. So you have mask 1, 2, 3, 4 N95 mask allotted for day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4, and then you can repeat this mask on day 5 again from the first mask, and this can go for 5 times. So you get to use 4 masks for 20 days. So this is one of the SOPs that is available. PP is, I think, something that we should not compromise on. Disinfection of the surfaces and the area inside the ICU. So thorough cleaning is something I believe was always present with all the ICUs, but now more emphasis is given on how well you are disinfecting your ICUs. Another thing is an administrative change is how many people are you keeping in your ICU. So now what we need is a protocol which relates to the rotational duties, how many people are inside the ICU at a given time, how many hours is a person inside your isolation ward, which is either for a suspect or a confirmed COVID-19 case, and eventually what are the SOPs that you have set for your own hospital, because there is no one size fits all formula over here. According to the resources that we have at our own center, we can go ahead with this. Then we come to machines. So what we are doing, what a lot of centers are doing, is that everybody is keeping a designated machine for the isolation ward. So you have your X-ray machine, your USG machine inside your COVID ward, and you don't take it out to any other ward. So these are the few changes when it comes to clinical changes, and then we come to mechanical changes. So now coming to mechanical changes, I think we've all been through these terminologies, but I'll just put some light on it. First is air circulation. So usually what happens in most of the ICU is there is a recirculatory system. So what your air conditioning system does is it brings air from the outside, brings it inside the ICU, and then it sucks it out and takes it back. So what mechanical change we need here is that we want the air to come inside, but we don't want that air to go back outside to any other part of your hospital. So these are certain changes. I think so they are a bit expensive when it comes for smaller centers to go through these changes. And what the guidelines say is that you need at least 12 air changes per hour with proper HEPA filters. And then coming to the pressure system, so what we've heard again and again and again is a negative pressure system. So in simple words, I'll tell you, a positive pressure system is a room in which you are standing and the air coming inside the room is being pushed out. So nothing can come inside the room from outside. This is your positive pressure. And in the contrary, a negative pressure system is the one in which you're making sure that the infection inside the room is not pushed outside. So what we need here is a negative pressure room. If it is not possible, the recommendations say at least make sure that the exhaust that is coming out of your bronchoscopy room, out of your ICU, is not subjected to another part of your hospital, which might be your waiting area, your OPD area, or the general ward, just make sure that if you have an exhaust system, the air is now being sent outside the building, preferably a few feet above the height of your building. So these are the mechanical changes, these are the clinical changes. And as I said, on administrative front, we will have to go for rotational duties. Not every person of the team will be entering your ICU. As we all know, we are always obliged to have expert advice from senior consultants, but it is safe for them and for all of us that physicians above the age of 60 do not enter the isolation ward. And when it comes to our regular staff, we have to split them up into rotational duties. So we have to limit the number of people in the ICU ward with the administrative and the mechanical changes.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Arbert. It was a very concise and sort of complete overview of how to go about for general ICU precautions. I think I'll ask Dr. Arpan to expand more about the management part. So could you tell us a bit about how a routine ARDS case is managed? What is the ARDS net strategy, and how do you give oxygen and non-invasive ventilation in these patients?
Yeah, Dr. Aditya, we have just started managing COVID patients in our hospital. So our experience is limited to quite a less number of patients, as far as about 10 or 12 patients as of now, out of which 2 or 3 are on ventilator. So far, I mean, Dr. Shitu just explained us the L and the H phenotypes very nicely, and maybe she can just elaborate here her more experience with the SMS COVID ward, how do they react to it. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there is any major changes in how we treat about a routine ARDS compared to a COVID ARDS, except that there is a more of a refractory hypoxemia that is there in such COVID patients. Rest all strategies, I think, more or less are same. So I'll just, if Dr. Shitu can just elaborate on that, I think.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Shitu, could you just answer this?
The thing how we go about is proning for 12 to 16 hours, and second is the recruitment phenomena. And amongst the two recruitment, what we are doing is, the intermittent, the traditional one that we used to do earlier also, that high P, 35 to 40 centimeter for again 40 seconds with an inspiratory hold. So these are the two things. And then we have those patients who do not respond to all of these. We have given plasma, but it has not been, all of them were okay. But I'm not sure that was due to the plasma or they just got better themselves. So that's about it. It's almost similar. We do have patients who have better compliance as compared to the influenza and pneumonias that we had.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question for you. One more. What's your take on elective intubation versus continuing with a non-invasive ventilation, which may mask or rather prolong an intubation and ultimately end up into an emergency procedure, which will
be
a huge health hazard to the healthcare worker who does the intubation. So what's your take?
So even in our setting and also in the guidelines, it is recommended that the intubation should be done early if the patient has a high respiratory rate on an NIV. So whenever you are hooking up the patient on NIV, please be very, very cautious. You really have to look whether the patient is tolerating. How is the respiratory rate, what is the saturation. If you don't feel that the patient is not responding to NIV, so it is better to, early intubate rather than delay it. And delayed intubation has a worse prognosis.
Okay. So, Dr. Utsav, any changes in the invasive mechanical ventilation strategy for these patients, and how to intubate these patients?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, sir. I would also like to elaborate on the point of Dr. Shitu, madam, is that the use of NIV. There's also something called high frequency oxygen, nasal oxygen. So HFNO has come up greatly in patients with mild ARDS. So if at all it is preferred, European guidelines and ATS are in unison on this point, that HFNO should be given early as compared to NIV, and that is it is better at times in mild ARDS. Again, in moderate ARDS, that is between 100 to 200, we have to think, we have to we have to give a clarity to all the listeners about the tidal volume. So if tidal volume is requirement of the patient is less than 9 ml per kg, and patient the PaO2 FI, once we started the BiPAP on the patient, NIV on the patient, and patient is responding well to it, the PaO2 FiO2 ratio is stable or is improving after 4 hours to 6 hours, and tidal volume requirement is less than 9 ml per kg, then we can continue BiPAP. If the tidal volume requirement is less or is mildly increased, but the PaO2 FiO2 ratio has not deteriorated, then we have to be very cautious and keep looking the patient in the next 6 hours. If the tidal volume requirement is increasing to more than 12 per ml per kg, and the patient is looking visibly in respiratory distress, and all these points are present, and the PaO2 FiO2 ratio is deteriorating, then we have to immediately go for intubation. We have to be very visible. Again, about invasive ventilation, then we have to come to this point of conservative fluid management. We know that ARDS is we always try to keep our patients dry in ARDS, but that strategy is not exactly the Chinese people tried this strategy of drying out the patient, didn't work out so well for them. So they have the ICMR guidelines launched by Government of India and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare have told something about the conservative management of fluid in the patient. Nothing excess, nothing too low. We should not load the patient with too much of fluids. We have to look for the signs of dehydration in the patient, the normal signs of dehydration, the MAP pressure. All these points are very important. Then empirical antimicrobial therapy is very important to these patients. We have to add empirical microbial drugs as per the local flora and fauna of our ICUs, and as per the local flora and fauna of the community acquired pneumonia we see in our OPDs. We have to add those antibiotics also. Do not routinely give corticosteroids. You know what, the experience with the MERS syndrome of 2012, they also found that the corticosteroids do not give that much of benefit, but actually delay the recovery by giving an immunosuppression. So corticosteroids are only recommended in very severe ARDS who are not responding to traditional treatment and is not responding even on ventilators, also for a very small duration of 3 to 5 days, and at the doses not more than 1 to 2 mg per kg dose. This is very important points. Yes, sir. Arpan sir wants to say.
Yes, Utsav, I think the role of steroids is still controversial in COVID.
Yes,
I don't know the optimum dose. Dr. Shitu, have you used it? What we have been using it is methylprednisolone on 120, 40 TDS to start with, and then tapering off. If the patient doesn't have comorbidities, it has initial hypoxemia and stuff. Because that initially may avoid a cytokine storm, if I'm not wrong, in the low dose. So what we need to here discuss upon is that a low dose steroid versus steroids at a normal dose.
I think most people, there is no evidence against or for the use of steroids in COVID ARDS, but probably most people are using it because of lack of any other medicine to use. Because I think that would be the general practice, and I don't think that is wrong also, because you know that something is working in other diseases, and unless you have strong evidence against that, would not recommend against using steroid. Anyway, the role of steroids in ARDS is still suspect, and generally they are used, of course, everybody knows before the. Yes, Dr. Shitu, if you want to say something.
We have had a couple of very interesting cases. These patients got COVID negative, were off the ventilator, and everything seemed better, but the only thing was they were hypoxic, and there were residual changes on the X-rays. So subsequently we gave these patients steroids, and subsequently the saturation got better. So what we were assuming, like just as in swine flu, we had a term post swine flu fibrosis. These patients are also having it's a viral pneumonia. So these post COVID pneumonias also have some residual fibrosis with some hypoxia, and these respond very nicely to steroids. 1 mg per kg of prednisolone. So, but this is just my experience and some data from post swine flu fibrosis.
Okay, so which day did you use steroids in these patients?
Once they are double negative, COVID double negative,
okay,
and they come to our routine respiratory ward from the COVID ward.
No, my question.
Yes.
My question to you, Dr. Seetu, you said that you use steroids when they are double negative. Mind that swab test is negative twice. After that, you start using it to avoid the post infection fibrosis, right? That's not what we are talking about. We are talking about the role of steroids.
About low dose. Yes, some of our very refractory cases we have given. Otherwise, we don't. But it is just our experience. It has been recommended in guidelines to give in favor, like the sepsis control guidelines. That paper has come. They favor the use of steroids, low dose steroids.
What dose?
1 mg per kg.
Okay. One more question to you is any experience of using ECMO with these patients, and would you recommend using it in such patients?
So we don't have ECMO at our place, so I don't have experience, but the guidelines saying that veno-venous ECMO is the preferred.
But would it not increase? We all know that the risk of thrombosis is significantly high in COVID ARDS. So would it, using an ECMO, whether veno-venous or the arteriovenous, would it increase that risk manifold, or we can still safely consider at some point in time? I mean, this is just a speculation.
I actually really have no idea, but all the guidelines are recommending ECMO, right from ATS to sepsis control.
I think the paucity of data has actually precluded any sort of recommendation on use or disuse of ECMO and ARDS. And so I think till then we can sort of continue with whatever we are doing, and let's hope that new medicine, sort of Brahmastra, comes out soon. I think I'll just sort of summarize the treatment in ARDS. I think the common practice and the sort of consensus is that treat ARDS like a standard ARDS. Prepare your ICU for COVID. That has been detailed in very well by Dr. Sameer. And start with an NIV or oxygen. If you have high frequency oxygen, then well and good. Do not wait too long for the patient to deteriorate. Go in for early intubation if you feel that the patient is deteriorating fast. Once you went, the intubation should be done by experienced person. Use minima and have it should not be sort of an emergency intubation. Do it an elective intubation. That would be better for everybody involved. For the ARDS, follow probably the ARDS net guidelines, and I think everybody is following low tidal volumes, high P, conservative oxygen management. There is some confusion about dry versus fluid-rich strategy, but I would still, I think, go with dry fluid management, because most of the trials in the past 20-30 years have favored that in other ARDS also. Confusion of steroids in ARDS is still there, and I think it will continue to be there until we have a lot of data. There have been lots of trials in other forms of ARDS. So we have talked about both the use of steroids in early ARDS and late ARDS. Dr. Seetu has a personal sort of experience in using it in late ARDS. But early ARDS, I would still say that go with the flow, whatever you have. I think if I'll just take final comments from each of the participants, and then we can move on to the questions. We have plenty of questions, and I would like to answer them, the panelists to answer them all, so that, so I think just final comments. Yes, Dr. Seetu, any final comment from you?
I think we summed it up very nicely, covering, right from the diagnostic test that we get stuck in, how to restart, our practice, our investigations, And right from the management of the basic diseases, the obstructive airway diseases, which includes asthma and COPD, I think we have covered almost everything, and the COVID pneumonia that we would be facing. So I think now everyone would be encountering these COVID patients in their outdoors. Because, once the lockdown opens, they would not be really going to the COVID dedicated hospital, but, infiltrating across all the general practice. So I think the thing is that when you are actually seeing patients in the outdoor, try to maintain a social distancing and have a protocol in the clinic itself. So I started my clinic 2 days back and I've already encountered one patient. So I think every one of us would be, facing this type of problem, and you need to set up a protocol for your outpatient clinic also once really start with that.
Okay, Dr. Sameer.
Yeah, I think we have to face COVID and we have to face a lot of non-COVID also. What we have seen is after the lockdown started opening, so we have had a tide of patients who were kind of who did not come to the hospital for the past 2-3 months. So a lot of asthma, COPD, a lot of lung cancer patients coming with pleural effusion, maybe who were just sitting home for the past 2 months, maybe waiting their time out that one day they'll come to the doctor. So we have a lot of COVID and a lot of non-COVID to attend to in the coming times. We'll have limitations. I believe almost everybody who's used a face shield, you cannot auscultate the patient. A lot of times when you're completely wearing your PPE, you have limitations even with communicating with the patient. So we have limitations of auscultation, maybe advising a PFT, or doing our routine protocol. So this is something new and we will get used to this. And I think the baseline should be that first thing we need to do is protect ourselves. One doctor has the capability of treating at least 1,000 patients in the coming few months. So if we put ourselves at a risk, even if we don't get severely, if we don't succumb to the disease, but we are quarantined or something like that, so that is a big problem. So first we need to protect ourselves.
Okay, Dr. Arpan.
Yeah. I think we should all come to terms that this is not the new normal. This is the normal. Dr. Sameer has already pointed out all the institutional guidelines that we should be following. As per the need and as the individual accessibility to everything, I think we should all follow those as much as possible and accept that this is going to stay with us for a long, long time. And I think the treatment aspects and everything has been nicely covered up. So I think as and when the new guidelines keep emerging for treating patients, we should keep ourselves updated.
Okay, so Dr. Utsal has the last word.
Sir, thank you, Aditya sir. Sir, we talked about everything, but we missed a very important part that is actually going on, is the psychological counseling of patients and their family. That is one part which is, grossly mismanaged. And corona is much more dangerous than corona itself. And there are since the time we have opened our OPDs, we have seen a lot of psychiatric patients coming with somatic chest pain and a routine cough being reassurance to the patients. That is very important, and reassurance to their families is very important. The psychological part has also to be managed by us. That part is it missed in most of the discussions, but yes, it is a crux, and it is what lies at the bottom and should be taken care of. And Dr. Aditya, we didn't hear your point of view, so that is also very important.
So I am actually the moderator. I don't have to say give any point of view. So I think to conserve time, I think we'll just move on to the questions. We have plenty of questions, and I definitely have the last word myself. I can spare the luxury for that to give it to me. I think one question is from Dr. Prakhar from Chandigarh. So I think I can take that question. So he says, "Good evening. I want to ask what the guidelines say about spirometers and negative pressure POD rooms, and how do we ensure that it translates to how many exhaust fans?" So I believe that I think we had already covered that. If you do not have a negative pressure isolation room, go in for a HEPA filter and 12 air exchanges per hour. If you can ensure that, And if that is not possible, general recommendation for routine bronchoscopy procedures where TB is common is to have at least 2 exhaust fans in the bronchoscopy room. And whether that is valid for a case of COVID, I do not know. But I would suggest that you go for a test beforehand and do very selective bronchoscopy, and spirometry try and avoid unless as already discussed. Okay, so the next question is from Dr. Avinash Chaskar from Thane. Okay, he is asking a case about interventions. I think Dr. Utsav can answer it. If a patient is diagnosed case of esophageal cancer, so shall we do bronchoscopy to check mobility of trachea as a treatment modality? If there are changes in trachea. So I think this is just again, if patient has esophageal cancer, do we
again, we have to wait for 2-3 days. We have to first get a COVID test done for this patient. I would like to emphasize, be safe today and you live to see tomorrow. That is the most important thing. And we have all friends who have routinely cancelled procedures, not just bronchoscopies, but surgical procedures because of COVID. And they have waited for the test. And even there are risks with tests coming negative. But please do a test before and then you can do what you want to do.
Okay, see, the other question is from Dr. Shivram Thakkar from Jaipur. Use of medical thoracoscopies in COVID time. I think Dr. Shitu can take it from our own city.
Yes, so actually he is my resident.
Okay. So I think then you should not take this. We should put the question to somebody else.
I have a bias here.
Okay. So I think the answer would be the same that we have discussed, that it should be similar. Do it if really indicated, probably. Any comments, Dr. Shitu?
Yes, so only emergent cases are malignancies that cannot be, it's actually semi-emergent cases that if it's a malignancy and you cannot diagnose it by any other modality, then a thoracoscopy again with a COVID and in a negative pressure room with a PPE and adequate precautions.
Okay. I think next question Dr. Arpan can take up. So this is one question from Dr. Datta from Odisha and another question from Dr. Om Prakash Samar from Kota. And they asked, do you advise COVID tests routinely to patients? And the second is, should you wear an N95 mask in the OPD every time?
Yeah, I'll take the first question. We generally go by our clinical suspicions. We have not been prescribing blanket tests for COVID. I don't know how the situation in Odisha is. In Gujarat, till about 1 week back, private labs were not allowed to do the testing. Number one. Number two, you cannot do testing on OPD basis. So in case if you want to do a testing, you need to admit a patient. From 1st of June, private hospitals have been allowed in Gujarat to admit those patients and then send their testing. But still OPD basis basic testing is not allowed. So I think you use your clinical judgment in the OPD to whether to send the test or not. Because still there are still 30%, even with the best of RT-PCRs, 30% will come false negative in first 3 to 4 days.
Okay. And
what was the second question?
Should the doctor wear a N95 mask in the OPD every time?
Of course, and I think Dr. Samir also pointed out in his earlier talk that there is a new policy of using 4 masks, which can be labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, and every 5th day you can use the day 1 mask. It's available on the net. You can just download it and follow it up. But wearing an N95 mask is compulsory. Recently, one of our ID consultants in Gujarat, they have come up with very bold guidelines in Ahmedabad as well, that you don't need to wear a complete PPE while you are doing doing an OPD. You can just wear an N95 and a face shield or a goggles and keep your patients at as far as possible. So that's one thing, because day by day what is going to happen is that you cannot wear a whole PPE kit every day. So this is some bold guidelines that's coming in last week. And I think only time will tell us that how things go about from here. But my take here is that if you're working in a very highly endemic area, I mean, this is a pandemic, but even if your area is a high cases, then I think wearing a PPE and just to safeguard yourself for the timing is always a better idea.
So I can share my personal experience in this. So I have been doing OPD for 3 weeks now. And before that, I was in quarantine because we had we came in contact with 2 positive patients who were admitted with us. And after that, we have been doing OPD. So we are generally wearing N95 mask. Actually, I'm wearing an FFP3 mask, which is almost similar. It's a European standard. And with the face shield, and we're wearing gowns. As soon as we enter the OPD, put on the gown, put on the face shield, wear the mask. Of course, we're wearing all the time. And I switch on my mobile, switch off the mobile phone, use the WhatsApp on whatever computer. We have a computer desktop in my room. Whatever thing, emails and everything that has to be checked is there. I do not use my mobile or even wear watches or even pens. Like don't bring them from our home. So everything is kept separate in the OPD so that you don't transmit. The risk of transmission of infection to your home environment is reduced. Of course, you cannot sort of cut off everything, but at least try and reduce the risk as far as possible.
So
So,
I think
yes.
I think bare below the elbow is the policy, along with an N95 and a face shield.
Yeah.
At the minimum.
Yes, I think if you have a gown which has full sleeves up till the wrist, that's also a good thing. And keep on sanitizing your hands. No need to wear gloves would be my recommendation.
Exactly.
Okay, Dr. Sameer, question from Dr. Naresh from Ulhasnagar. Will influenza vaccine give protection from COVID infection? Dr. Sameer, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. So right now, whatever we've discussed in the past 1 hour, most of these are best care practices. We don't have trials which are supporting a lot of things that have been discussed. So there is no trial, there's no recommendation that influenza vaccine has any role when it comes to protection from COVID-19.
Okay. But would you recommend routine vaccination? The standard vaccinations which are going on?
Not right now.
Indication?
No, not right now. I would like maybe Dr. Shitu's experience, but from my side, not right now.
So what is the problem? I think we are continuing with vaccination according to the recommendations.
I would maybe a completely asymptomatic patient is one that I would recommend, but anybody who's a suspect, I will not.
Okay. Dr. Shitu, you have anything to add to this?
What was the question?
The question was, will influenza vaccine give protection from COVID? So, of course, that is no. So, the second question is, do you continue with routine vaccinations in this time? For example, pneumococcal vaccination, influenza vaccination, according to the recommendations.
Yes, I think we can continue now since we have started our outpatients and we have more patients coming in. That's one of the major, the patients asking questions, and there's nothing in the guidelines as such that you cannot put unless it is an active viral infection, you can administer the vaccines.
Yeah, I think that's the practice, and we are actually using the vaccines as per need as recommendations. Another question is, what about the N95 mask with the valve? And I think there has been, I just answered this. We have actually published an article in the IGTLD about use of use of the dupattas and all those for prevention of COVID for the routine people. And actually, there has been a study from Singapore. So they have also recommended that for routine people, for non-healthcare workers, these things can be used, especially for the N95 mask with the filter. So that is not useful for preventing spread from you to the other person. So if you've seen some mask which has a filter, it is basically to give some, so that the person who's wearing the mask can breathe easily. Some of these, there are two types of filters. One is the filter which does not have a glass cover, and another is the filter which has a glass cover. The one with the glass cover has some small holes which can be used for ventilation. Probably that is better as compared to the other one which has a filter that is not useful for preventing spread. So I would say that avoid using those masks with filters. I think another thing is, another question is, do all, this is from Dr. Mandal from Calcutta, do all X-ray and CT technicians need PPE? So Dr. Utsav, can you comment on this?
See, sir, the point of X-ray technicians using PPE is, I would rather have them wearing an N95 mask with gloves and proper protocol being followed of a no touch technique. That would be because in a resource limited situation, that is important. If you have excess of it, you can have everybody in your OPD covered with a PPE, but we have to be realistic about it. Yes,
I
if
think
you're doing
Government of India has also
if you're doing an ultrasound, yes, the doctor should take utmost precaution. And actually, I've met a lot of radiologists who are doing ultrasound with wearing a PPE. That is good for them. They are coming in actual close contact. For X-rays, you have to make some protocols. Yes, X-ray technicians should wear an N95 mask, should wear gloves, and should try a no-touch technique while doing the X-rays.
Okay. I think the government of India has sort of the guidelines. In the guidelines, they have mentioned all this. We'll have just one or two questions more. I think then we're sort of running out of time. So, any role of long-term glycoperonium? Dr. Arpan, do you have any comments on this? This is question from Dr. Pani Grahi from Puri. Probably is asking about role of glycoperonium in treatment of COPD. Any issue about safety in that sense?
I don't think so. I think we can continue going along with it.
And there is one more question which comes along with this. That is any difference between the DPI and MDI?
Okay, I think the way to go forward in this scenario is MDI with a spacer with a valve, which Dr. Shitu has already pointed out. I think we won't be more comfortable prescribing DPIs in this scenario. I think Dr. Shitu can also put her views on this. We already discussed that in the earlier sessions. I mean, in the session in the earlier.
I agree with you. Anything, either of those, MDI with spacer with a valve is better. Yeah. And you have to, keep the patient's, choice in mind. Sometimes they are adamant to get a DPI only. You need to be a little bit flexible.
Or the best thing that we can go along is the breath actuated devices that are available in the market. That would be the best if that they can afford and use it up. Otherwise, MDI with spacer with a valve is the way to go.
So I think I'll just put a comment here that mostly whatever studies have been done in the past few years about the aerosolization rates of MDIs or DPIs and nebulizers, the rates of MDIs and DPI causing aerosol dispersion in the surrounding air is very low. Nebulization, of course, there is a huge amount of a sort of aerosol dispersion. There is one question also and one comment that somebody has written that using a dedicated nebulizer for every patient is feasible and should be done for asthmatics whenever indicated. Of course, it is feasible, but I would still say avoid, if possible, put the patient on an inhaler rather than a nebulizer because of multiple reasons. We don't have the time to discuss that right now. And okay, so one last question for Dr. Sameer. So somebody has written from Cuttack. During the emergency, when only one nebulizer machine is available, what is the protocol to use it for multiple patients who are serious in the COVID era? So any comments?
Personally, we have stopped using nebulizers completely in our ICU. Maybe Dr. Shitu can tell if she's dealt with more emergency cases. I have not even given a chance to such a scenario.
Okay.
So, Aditya sir, if you allow, we have got a couple of questions from other platforms as well, Facebook Live and all, if time permits. So,
we have time. I think everybody is agreeing we have the time.
Yes, I think we can take a couple of questions.
Yeah. So, sir, one question was on experience with powered air purifying respirator. So, any of our panelists, if they have experience with this, and does it have any superiority or additional advantages?
Okay, so would Dr. Sameer wants to take up this question? Yes.
Yeah, so I believe the first advantage is the comfort, that you have the comfort of fresh air coming to your hood, and there is absolutely no fogging taking place with the PAPR. So what I believe is you can wear it for a longer time compared to your full face respirator mask, which is kind of claustrophobic. But the biggest deterrent here is the price. The price is very high.
Dr. Sameer, I think probably the question was related to the use of air purifiers, like they have been using for air pollution.
PAPR. I
No,
suppose.
sir, it was PAPR. Yeah.
PAPR.
Yeah. And in fact, we have a question on air purifiers also. So somebody has asked a question whether you should use an air purifier in the room. Will it cause precaution? Will it cause sort of prevent against COVID?
The last evidence that is there with the air purifiers, most of the air purifiers are basically gimmicks. These are products made by various companies, often claiming protection against different level of pollutants. And now I don't see any advertisement claiming any protection against COVID-19. But these are not medical devices. These are not medical recommendations. I don't think so.
Yeah, Dr. Shitu, after you.
The SARS-CoV-2 is all viruses are very small. So I don't think so. These routine air purifiers and, that we use would actually be able to filter down the virus. Maybe the larger bacteria, but I really doubt that they can filter out the viruses.
Yes, Dr.
I think using an air purifier into room does not make any sense to me, because this is something which you go out, someone coughs and you catch it through that. So in your own house or in your room, in this scenario, putting in an air purifier I don't think it would make any major difference to that.
Okay. Any comments? Has anybody used that PAPR? Because I personally have not used. Okay, Dr. Sameer has used. Is it available? Could you tell us what is the cost of a PAPR?
Yeah, so the basic problem is the cost. The cost is approximately 1,20,000. The advantage is it can be reused. It has filters which can be changed, and you can clean or disinfect the PAPR hood. So it can be used again and again, but the basic problem is buying it for the first time. You need to use it. Maybe if your center has a lot of patients, you are doing a lot of interventional procedures, but I think an N95 mask with a face shield is good enough.
Okay.
So, sir, we have another question from Kanpur. Dr. Dheeraj is asking that a case series was published from Japan for COVID-19 pneumonia. They used this cyclosonide inhalation and found to be useful, and which was also explained in some in vitro studies. So, what is the take of Dr. Shitu on that? Because she was talking about this use of corticosteroids. So cyclosonide in the COVID-19 pneumonia.
So there have been some preliminary reports. We are not using cyclosonide, but there have been preliminary reports that cyclosonide offers some protection against COVID. But we really need randomized controlled trials to actually say and emphasize the need for them. And currently the situation is so bad that anything and everything is getting published. So we really need to read the document carefully and what are the limitations, because there's nothing, guidelines are not there, and that is why even inferior quality data is coming in. So we need to take it with a pinch of salt, and we need a RCT before we advise using cyclosonide for COVID.
Right.
If you look at it theoretically, then probably cyclosonide is just another steroid, and most of these steroids have similar mechanisms of action. It's just the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics which are different. So theoretically, I believe that there should be no difference unless there is a really separate quality of that molecule which has been unrevealed till now.
So, sir, we will take just a last question from Kolkata. One physician is asking that is there any validated questionnaire or tool which can postpone the need of spirometry and close contact with the asthma patients?
Okay, so anybody wants to take up that question? Nobody wants to take up the question. I think Dr. Shitu, you are best qualified in asthma right now. I think you should take up this question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So the physician is asking that is any validated questionnaire which can postpone the need of spirometry and the close contact?
So I think there we have some questionnaires which are validated for checking the control of asthma. But for postponing, we really don't have. You can actually prepare it one yourself. I think we were talking, all of us were talking about this that yesterday only. That if we have a questionnaire, it would be easier. Yes, it definitely would be. But I think you can customize it according to your local things. We currently, I think, don't have anything. We do have questionnaires to assess the control. That is the asthma control test and the asthma control questionnaire. But not anything for the. Am I right, Dr. Aditya?
Yeah.
Do you know of any questionnaires?
Most of the questionnaires and things are just to sort of have more publications from the Western world. For if you really get down to the practicalities of OPD management, most of these questionnaires are actually not useful, at least in my opinion. They are useful in different contexts, like for example, in checking patients who are enrolled in clinical trials where you want to have a yardstick to actually measure any changes. But in a day-to-day busy OPD, it's very difficult to have. So I think what you said is very relevant, that you can use your own clinical experience, build up a questionnaire of 3-4 questions, not more than that, which you can apply in any patient in a very rapid manner, so that you don't lose any time and you have those things. So as such, there is no validity of any questionnaire as such. The ECT, of course, has been accepted by most people for somewhat similar circumstances, but no actual questionnaire for this scenario.
Sir, final concluding remarks from your side. Aditya, sir.
So yeah, I have the last sort of pleasant duty to thank everybody of all the panelists for having an exhaustive discussion on this thing. We were not able to cover everything. We have not gone into ILDs. We have not gone into other respiratory infections. We have not gone into sort of lung cancer. And it's not possible to do that in such a limited time. So everybody, and I'd like to sort of thank the audience for actually joining us and making this an interactive session. I think it's high time that the paranoia and hysteria of COVID is actually watered down. And on the ground, I believe that mostly COVID is behaving more like a routine respiratory infection like H1N1 influenza or other infections. To put some things in perspective, I would say that if you look at the other respiratory disorders only, not talking about disorders in other branches of medicine, but in pulmonary medicine only, about 6% of Indian population is affected with COPD, 4 to 6% is affected with asthma. There are almost 80 to 90 lakh cases of tuberculosis in India, and it is spreading there. More patients die of swine flu every year than of COVID. COVID has actually led to a decrease in the mortality rate overall, as we are saying, though I would take that with a pinch of salt because maybe there is some sort of lack of data. We need to take precautions. There is no doubt about it, but I think the paranoia, especially in the general public, has to be curtailed somehow. Now the lockdowns are sort of winding down, and that's a good step. And I hope everybody remains safe, and the control of this infection should go back into the hand of the doctors rather than other people. And I think with that, I would like to end this session. Thank you to Lupin for sponsoring this webinar.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of entire Lupin team, I would like to show gratitude to all of our speakers, Dr. Aditya, Dr. Utsav, Dr. Samir, Dr. Shitu, and Dr. Arban, for this interactive and very informative and insightful panel discussion. And I would also like to thank all of our participants or the viewers who were also enthusiastic enough to post the questions. And I'm sure that they must have enjoyed this panel discussion very much. And I assure our audience that similar to today's event, we will keep conducting these kind of educational activities for them with some difference. Thank you very much. Thank you all. So we can go offline.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vinay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.